Hi, my name's Patrick Inhofer. I'm with MixingLight.com, and we are dedicated to developing the skill and craft of digital video color correction and finishing and delivery. And yes, now that Resolve has editing and even Fairlight and Fusion, you'll find some of that even on our website as well. And today we're talking about speed changes. I've been in DaVinci Resolve for 10 years. Speed changes have come a long way in DaVinci Resolve. It used to be very simple changes we could make to our speed. Now we've got some very advanced optical flow, and we can do all of these crazy speed warps. And I'm going to show that to you in this movie right now. And we're going to start with the simplest of scenarios, which is you've shot some footage and you shot it over cranked. You shot it instead of 24 frames per second, which would be a normal in the US, or 25 overseas. What if you shot it at 48? But you want it to play back at 24, and when you pull it into the software, it's pulling it in at 48. So you shot this footage that you want to see in slow motion, and it's playing back at the full frame rate that you shot in the camera. How do you solve that problem? Well, it turns out it's pretty simple. So I've got this footage here I picked up from red.com, from their website, and this is demo footage of theirs. And as I play it down, and let's go full screen on it, it looks like it's playing back at pretty much full speed, right? Doesn't look like it's slow motion, and this looks like terrific footage that you would have overcranked, so that when you play it back at 24 frames per second, you get this beautiful slow motion effect. Well, let's pull up our metadata panel up here in the upper right. And the clip is highlighted, and you can see that for some reason, when it was pulled into DaVinci Resolve, for some crazy reason, DaVinci Resolve is reading this at 48 frames per second. And when you see that here in the metadata inspector, when you see 48 frames per second, that's how fast it is playing back in the timeline. So if you have a 24 frame per second timeline, let's do that. Let's jump into a timeline here. Let's just grab this clip. And even though this timeline is set up to play at 24 frames per second, this clip is playing inside this timeline at 48 frames per second. I'll hit play. And now we're inside the timeline, and it's still playing back in real time. That could make a lot of people pull their hair out. How do you fix this problem? How do you change it so that the base frame rate is at the frame rate that you want, that you can force it? And here in DaVinci Resolve, when we make these changes, we are not changing the footage on your hard drive. These are metadata changes that we're making, only happening within the software, not changing the footage on your hard drive. Really important point to remember. So now it doesn't matter if I do this from the media pool up here on the edit page, or on the cut page up here, or on the media pool over here. It's all the same media pool on all of these pages. So what I'm going to do is right click on this clip and choose clip attributes. And here is where I'm going to set how this project interprets this footage. In this case, I don't want it at the recording rate of 48 frames per second. I want it to play back so the slow motion looks awesome every time I edit it into the timeline at 24 frames per second. And when I do this, take a look at the duration here in the metadata panel. And the duration just doubled to 16 seconds from 8 seconds. And when I come into the edit page and I go ahead and play this back, let's go full screen. Oh, look at that. Nice. Now we've got this nice, beautiful slow motion effect happening. And in fact, we even cut out of it a little early because we've doubled the length of this shot, but the edit itself didn't change its length. So I can go ahead and pull this out. So now I can get through and watch to the end of the clip and see that nice, beautiful slow motion effect that was captured in camera. So the slow motion technically isn't being executed by DaVinci Resolve, it was captured in camera. So this is a common problem that people run into and aren't quite sure the correct way of fixing it in DaVinci Resolve. In truth, in DaVinci Resolve, we've got multiple ways of making these types of speed effect changes. The key here, when do you want to go into clip attributes and make this change? The key to remember is when you edit that clip into a timeline, What speed do you want to see in that timeline? That's what clip attributes is controlling. What happens if I change it? Let's say I go into later in the timeline, I use the same shot, and now I want to play back at 48 frames, and I get the bright idea that I'll just go into clip attributes and change it, even though elsewhere I've got it playing at 24 frames. What happens? Well, let's try that. Let's right click, come up here to clip attributes, change this now to 48 frames per second, click OK. And you'll notice this is a relatively new behavior in Resolve where the clip goes offline. I'm not happy about this behavior. It has gone offline. Changing it in the media pool has changed it here in the timeline. If I edit this shot edited multiple places, maybe taking different pieces of it, the only way to fix these shots is to re-edit them into the timeline. And by the way, this is undoable. So if I make this mistake, as long as I haven't gotten too far along after having made this change, I can just undo. And we're now back to our clip attributes, and we're back at our 24 frame per second frame rate. So let's imagine that we've got this shot here, and we do want it to play back at 48 frames per second later on. So let's pick a little later section, maybe right here. So I'll mark an in, I'll mark an out, and I'll just drag this down here. And what I want to do now is play this section real time. Now let's take it a little further down the timeline because we've got some other shots here. How would I do that without making this go offline, without having to do the clip attributes thing? Now we're looking at how to execute a speed change. There are two types of frame rate changes here in DaVinci Resolve: constant rate and variable rate. The simplest of the two is the constant rate, and we're going to start with the most basic command, probably one of the first speed change commands that most editors learn, because it's here on the edit page, it's built into the user interface, which is fit to fill. Let's take a quick look at that. Fit to fill will give us a constant rate speed change. The way it works is simple. Let's say on this particular shot, my producer tells me right after about that third burst of fire coming out from this car, what we want to do is now get the rest of this race in the next second and a half. In other words, I am going to place an in point here. I'm going to match frame it so I get the exact same frame on the source side. I'm going to mark an in point there so that when I edit this in, it's going to be a seamless edit. But what I want to do is I only want the rest of this shot to last a second and a half. So I'll come back over to the timeline side. I'm going to press plus 1.15, hit enter. That's about a second and a half technically. On the out point, it'll grab 1.16. You can see that's my duration right there, because the out is always inclusive of the frame I'm on, and I moved forward 1.15. All right, on the source side, what I want is the rest of this shot up until the car hits right there, right behind this pole, but before the fire pops out, right about there. That's where I want the shot to end. So I'm going to press an out here. So what I need to do is take this duration, which is 10 seconds long, and I need to make it fit into this 1.5 second duration, right? It's called a fit to fill. So what's going to happen is when I edit this shot in, it's just going to take that entire 10 seconds will take this little section of the timeline. So I'm going to click, drag, and go ahead and fit to fill. When I do that, it overwrites what was underneath it, and it adds this little section. Let's delete this tail end, come back, hit play, and see what we get. Boom. So you can see that entire rest of the race, that 10 seconds, just fit into a very short duration using the fit to fill command. You can also find the fit to fill command up here on the edit menu. Scroll on down, there's fit to fill, and it also has a shortcut of Shift F11. One thing to be aware of is it works best really on the edit page. That's where you'll find this command is most reliable. I've always had trouble getting this to work on the cut page, even though in theory it should. Fit to fill is great when you know that you've got one duration you need to fit in the other duration. In this example, we sped the shot up, but you can also slow it down. So if you've got a 3-second hole and you've got a 15 frame clip, you can fit to fill that, and that 15 frames will slow down precisely to the number needed to fill that hole that you've predefined. Remember, the key here is you want an in and out point on your timeline, you want an in and out point on your source footage, and then fit to fill will do whatever it has to do at precisely the speed it needs to do it in order to make that fit happen. Now, once you've got a clip in the timeline and you then want to change the frame rate, you can do that. But it's different on the cut page than it is on the edit page. To be more precise, on the cut page, you have fewer options. So you have some very basic controls for manipulating time on the cut page. Whereas on the edit page, you have a lot more options that really open up some advanced workflows. So let's start with the simple approach first on the cut page. So I'm going to jump down here into the cut page, and there are two places where we can access our speed controls. One is to open up the tools palette, this little palette right here with these little widgets there. And when I click on that, it opens up a whole bunch of tools in here. The only one we're going to look at is the speed control tool. And I'm going to close this because I'll show you another way, a kind of shortcut of getting there, which is to right click with your mouse. You right click and you choose change speed from this contextual menu. When you do that, it opens up the tools palette and it automatically opens you into the speed control. Down here is the speed control. The only thing you can really control here is this speed here, and there are two ways of controlling this. You click and drag left and right. Clicking and dragging to the right will speed up the shot, which means it gets shorter because it's playing back faster. So if I let go, you see the clip down here shortened up. I'm actually playing this back at 2.25 times speed, or 225% speed. And I'm going to play in to out. Let's Command F to get it full screen, move my mouse, and now we're going to loop through. And yeah, you can see that's playing now at a much faster speed. Or I can go even slower by clicking and dragging to the left. And notice as I click and drag, the clip is now going to get longer down here because it's going to take more time to play through this. So let's take a look at that. And yeah, you can see it is now playing in way slow motion, super slow motion. So this is a basic speed effect here on the cut page. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. Very basic tool. A lot of us don't like thinking in terms of this 0.38 or 1.0. So if I hit 1, now we're back to normal speed. A lot of us, me included, don't really like thinking of it in terms of this. I think in terms of frames per second or percentages. If you want that, then you're going to jump into the edit page. So this is the section we've been working on right down here. What I'm going to do is right click and choose change clip speed. Now what happens is I get this menu item, this change clip speed menu item, and now I'm thinking in percentages and I'm thinking in frames per second. And I can enter in either one of these. I can hover scrub to go faster, slower. Notice as I change one, it's going to change the other. It's also showing me the new duration of the clip as I change it. Or if I wanted to say play this at 75%, I could just click it at 75%. So it's a slight slow motion effect. Zoom in and let's go ahead and loop that around. And yeah, you can see it's a slight slow motion effect going on there. We're not playing back at normal time. The other thing you can do, and this is probably easier to show on another timeline. So I've got another timeline set up for us here where we've got this boxer, and I'm going to just mute out this audio because it's not needed. And let's play this through. So I've got the female boxer, and so she's in slow motion on the first clip and full speed on the second clip. All right, and let's say that we want to speed her up on the first clip. So what I'm going to do is right click, choose change clip speed. I get this menu again. And now I want to double time her. I want to play her back at 200%. So I'll come down here, and that's 48 frames per second, hit change. Now notice her clip got shorter, but it left the second clip exactly where it was. Why was that? Let me undo. Let's take another look. That's because I didn't enable ripple sequence. So if you want to do a slowdown and pull everything behind it, either push it back because you're lengthening it out, or pull it out because you're shortening it while speeding up, you're going to want to enable ripple sequence. So I'm going to change this to 200%. It brought the clip with it. This is something you have to be careful of. It can be very dangerous if you're not careful, but when it's useful to you, it's really useful. It saves you a couple mouse clicks. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look and see how this is playing down. Yeah, so she's playing back now, way more feeling like real time. I imagine she's probably recorded at 48 frames per second, which is about where we're playing her back right now. So now on the second shot, if I want to slow it down, we just speeded this shot up, change clip speed, and now let's slow it down to 25%. 6 frames per second, we're playing it back now. I don't care about rippling the sequence because I don't have anything behind it, so I can turn that off if I want. Change. And notice when I did that, the clip didn't automatically get longer, so it's not going to ripple the sequence unless you tell it to ripple the sequence. So now I have this wide shot playing back slower in the same duration that I had originally played it back at. And so we're probably going to want to have to take this and lengthen it out to get a couple shots in before we move on to the next shot. Regular speed, and then she goes slow motion. What if we think it's a little weird that we're going from regular speed and immediately to the wide shot in slow motion? What if we want to slow her and ramp her down in the middle of that bouncing up and down in that hero shot, getting ready to take a punch? Here's where things get lots of fun, where we move into retime effects. Retime effects are those fancy slow motion and speed up effects where you see it ramp down into slow motion or it ramps back up into full speed or hyperspeed. And so that's what we're going to look at next here in Resolve, are these retime effects. We're going to look for that point where we want to slow her down, and I'm going to take it on this action here. If we just go to single screen here, let's make this a little larger. So we're going to take it right there where you really see her her eyes, she blinks and then her eyes come up. Right there is where we're going to start slowing her down. And so what I'm going to do is, having selected that frame, right click and open up my retime controls. And you'll see that I've got a new kind of UI showing up here. So I've got the speed change little icon pops up here. I've got these little blue arrows showing me that I'm in a retime mode. And it's actually showing me already. It remembers that I sped this up to 200%. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to click this little disclosure, which opens up this flyout window, and it gives me a bunch of options. And we're going to start up here with add a speed point. Remember, we already selected where we want this speed change to happen. We've already set ourselves on the frame. So now all I need to do is go ahead and add a speed point, and right where we're sitting, it adds a speed point. I can change this speed point. But the other thing you'll notice is when I add this speed point, I've got 200% on the right and 200% on the left. So let me undo this and watch this behavior here. I'm going to undo. So now we have just one pull down disclosure. Add a speed point. Now I've got 2 pull down disclosures. This means I can change the speed before the speed point and the speed after the speed point. So now what we want to do is, remember, we hit the speed point and we want to slow her down. So what we're going to do is change the speed from 200% down to 100%. Now when I play through this, Option F, move my mouse out of the way. There we go. So she starts out in real time, and then she just quickly hits right on that frame where we set that speed point. She quickly slows down. Now I can even do that and get a little more dramatic with it. Maybe right here at the beginning, we start her in slow motion. She speeds up and then she slows down again. I can add another speed point here. And maybe we start her at 75% there. So notice when we're slowing down, these arrows turn yellow and they get further spaced apart. When we're speeding up, they're blue and they're more compressed. And then when they're playing at 100%, they're blue, but they're evenly spaced. All right, so now what's going to happen here, I hit play. She speeds up, slows down, and then we go into the wide shot. Now, once we add these speed points, we're not locked into where they are. You'll notice in this UI, I've got two different thumb tabs here. I like thinking of them as thumb tabs, right? These are points where you can kind of place your thumb on them and drag them. So what happens if I drag the lower point? If I click and drag, you'll notice that as I drag the point, the speeds are staying the same on either side of the speed point. But what's happening is I'm including more and more frames. So in this case, this is doing a 200% speed up. So the shot is actually getting shorter as I do this because I'm delaying when this next speed effect takes place. I'm changing the frames. This is showing me when I'm clicking and dragging, it's showing me the frame at the moment where the next speed change takes place. I can do the same thing up front and pick exactly, let's say right on her eye blink right there. Boom. That's where I want that effect to start. Speed back up. And then as her hands move right here, right when the gloves pass each other, right there is where I want the next speed change to happen. And then this one, we're really going to slow down and we're going to change this down to 50%. Keep an eye on the numbers on either side of the speed point, 50% and 200. When I click up here, notice that the frame doesn't change anymore. The viewer up top is where the playhead is. It's not updating for me like it was when I clicked down here. When I click up here, it's just saying, oh, you just want to either slow down or speed up the section to the left of the speed ramp. So I'm staying at 50% here. I'm only affecting the speed effect to the left of my speed point. So maybe what I really want is to go from 75 up to 142, then down to 50. Let's play that through. So I've got, kind of a weird little thing going where she's playing slow motion, faster motion, and then slow motion again. In fact, let's even take this 50% and really slow it down to 25% just to make the point. There we go. And then she's really coming in for the punch, and then away we go, right? But what about that really smooth transition that we might want to make? Well, that's where we go into the retime curve. So I'm right-clicking on the clip itself. We jump into the retime curve, and now, let's give ourselves some more room here. Yeah, now you see it. Now you see it. We've got our curve. So I can select this point, change this from linear into a slope, and now I can really change how this effect, and if I drag up and down, you can see how I'm changing both sides of the effect. In order to ramp this exactly the way I want it, I'll grab this here, change that into a curve. I can pull this out in order to smooth out that ramp. I can not move it up and down. You'll notice it only goes left and right. It doesn't go up and down. But I can drag this in either direction to change the speed on both sides of the effect. And now, if we hit home, Shift F, let's see what we've done to ourselves here. Slows down. And you notice we've overwritten this back shot. As this got longer, it kept just overwriting this shot next to it, which we'd have to lengthen out. And finally, I want to show you something that happens whenever you're doing slow motion and the computer is generating extra frames in order for you to make the slow motion happen, which is we're playing this back at 32%. And we know that we didn't record as many frames as we're playing back, and the computer's just doubling up those frames. Is there anything you can do to make this image look a little less stuttery? So if I set this into loop and play it back, you can notice like on her gloves and her arms, it just feels very stuttery. It doesn't feel smooth. It kind of feels like this is a little bit computer generated. What can we do to solve that? Well, there are effects in here. So if we have this clip highlighted and we're in the edit page, we jump up into the inspector, and if you scroll down, there's retime and scaling. Double click to open that. And the retime process, if you have DaVinci Resolve Studio, you can jump into Optical Flow, And now when I go full screen, let me turn on this loop. You see that the jumpiness goes away. We actually have a very smooth looking image. This is what you get when you upgrade to DaVinci Resolve Studio. If you try this, you can try this on the free version of Resolve, and you'll probably end up getting a bunch of watermarks on here. So just turn it off, the watermarks go away. But Optical Flow is one of those things where it uses advanced image algorithms to make in between frames, to smooth out that jitteriness. And that can be very, very useful. So if you're looking for something like that, you know it exists, you don't know where to find it in DaVinci Resolve, now you do. It's under Retime and Scaling, under the properties for the individual clip. Did you happen to notice some problems near the end of that shot with that optical flow? The optical flow looked great. It really did eliminate a lot of that stutteriness we were seeing in the motion, and that's exactly what you want optical flow to do, to create frames where none existed before. But in the process, you can sometimes create artifacts. And what do those artifacts look like? They were just there, but they're often not where you're looking. So when you're using optical flow, it's really useful to take a critical eye to the rest of the shot. What am I talking about? Well, let me go ahead. I'm going to play down. I'm going to put an in and out point in here so that we can loop around it. Turn my loop on. All right, let's watch down and take a look at this optical flow. Looking at her gloves, they look great. But if you notice back behind her at the American flag, especially where the flag gets close, like right about in here, in this range right in here, watch what happens as her gloves pass over a lot of this very fine detail. And the motion estimation runs into a bit of a problem, and you're going to see some kind of artifacting going on in there. So let me go once ahead. Let's loop this around a couple times and keep an eye on that section. And you can see it on the bottom row of the white stripes on the American flag. You really see what it is I'm talking about there, especially those last few frames. You get this weird judder that kind of gives away the optical flow. Is there anything you can do about that? The answer is yeah. There are possibilities of doing away with that. And you can't always guarantee that these will work, but they're options for us. So if you come back to your retime and scaling in the inspector and you make sure the clip is highlighted so you know what it is you are adjusting, when optical flow is enabled, notice if I go to frame blend, motion estimation disappears. I can't adjust that because motion estimation is an optical flow adjustment. Once I do that, motion estimation, that opens up for me, and I'm going to come down and change this off of project settings. So what are we using now? Which of these processes is this project set up for? Let's jump up to our preferences, and in the master settings, if we scroll down to the very bottom, you're going to see frame interpolation here. And we've got retime and motion estimation mode. So every time you edit a shot into the timeline, however these are set up here in your preferences is the default settings that get applied to every single shot. Now, they don't come into play until you turn on your retime and scaling. They're ignored most of the time. But when you start retiming or you start zooming up or shrinking down, that's when these come into play. The retime is set for nearest. We overwrote that before for optical flow. So let me go ahead and let's just switch that to optical flow. Now, what is our motion estimation mode that is default here in Resolve? So if I take a look here, we're looking at project settings under motion estimation. Well, standard faster. That's what is default. If I open this up, I've got several other options. There's standard better. And then in Resolve 16, some new options were added, enhanced faster and enhanced better. So basically, as you move up from top to bottom, the further down you go, the more processor intensive this becomes. And so you're often working on a trade-off between quality and real-time playback. Maybe on your computer, you can get real-time playback up to standard better, and then you drop into one of these, and now you have to cache things off in order to see your clip playback in real time. So let's go ahead and let's assume that we've got a faster computer and we want enhanced faster. So we'll select that. That becomes our project default. I hit save. So even though motion estimation is set to project settings, we've gone ahead and set the project to one of these enhanced modes. Now let's go ahead and take a look what happens here when we loop around, keeping an eye on that flag. And there we go. Already we're getting much better results. You'll notice that the white stripe is no longer juddering. Her gloves still look very clean. I do want to show you one more option, which you can override and only exists on a clip level under motion estimation, which is speed warp. So as I said before, as we move down these options, they get more and more processor intensive. Let's hit speed warp. And speed warp is going to be the most advanced of these algorithms. It's also going to be the one that's most difficult for your computer to play back in real time. Let's go ahead and see what my computer does. So full screen, loop around. It's not playing back in real time. It's very, very slow. It requires, even on this computer, a ton of processing power. So what I'm going to have to do is turn on my caching. So I'll go to playback, render cache smart. And now I'm going to get a little indicator, and you can see that this red indicator means, yeah, I don't think I can play this back in real time. Let me cache this off. So I'm just going to let this turn to blue so that now I'm going to get real-time playback, loop around. Yeah, and this is really, really clean. I'm only seeing a minimal amount of motion blurring around her boxing gloves, and only the amount that I need to make it look natural. I'm really happy with this. So now you've got a good look at how optical flow works, motion estimation. Now I'm pretty sure at the time of this recording, speed warp is probably a studio only, so you need the paid version of DaVinci Resolve. You can pull it up, you'll just get some watermarks on it. If you don't, then that means they've made it part of the free version. So it never hurts to try one of these features, because over time, things that used to be part of the paid version of Resolve become integrated into the free version. So never hurts to give this a shot and see what you get. So there you go, a very in-depth explanation about changing clip speeds in DaVinci Resolve. Two different layers. There's in the media pool, and there's within a timeline. Within a timeline, we have constant, and then we have these variable, these retime speed effects. And then you can even get into the curve, and you have some advanced controls there in the curves. Also, in the retime controls, there are a bunch of other options in there I didn't really go through, but if you go through them, they're relatively explanatory. Play around with them. Download some footage from red.com, download some footage from the Blackmagic website. There is, beneath this video, a link to MixingLight.com. We have a page that accompanies this video that takes you through everything we just talked about in a very succinct text format, as well as links to where you can find this source footage that I downloaded and used for this presentation. I really do hope I'll see you one day on MixingLight.com. If you're interested in DaVinci Resolve, color correction, editing, finishing, fusion, definitely stop by, give us a look, and we'll be very happy to get you up to speed on DaVinci Resolve and really help you develop your skill as your experience level with the software develops. For MixingLight.com, I'm Patrick Inhofer, and I hope to see you again.